So hi, I'm Alfred Solis. I'm with the Buck Institute for Education. I'm the Director of Innovation there. Just if you haven't been to BIE, we basically focus on anything and everything for project-based learning. Our organization does publications, professional services globally. Yearly, we probably do about 15 to 17,000. We work with 15 to 17,000 teachers in face-to-face workshops who are trying to learn how to do project-based learning. So I'm kind of basically talk about kind of the innovations or what's happening lately in education. So first off, I just want to show our building. So this is where I work. So we're basically redoing the entire first floor of our building. I work with all of our subcontractors and all that. I moved everybody upstairs, our 16 employees, and we're basically still doing our services and whatnot. But downstairs, we're renovating. So not only am I Director of Innovation, I'm Director of Renovation. And it's funny, when you think about in education, there's this notion of innovation, but there's a lot of honoring what's in the room. And that's why kind of this idea of renovation, what's happening, and how is it subtly changing for folks, and especially when it comes to learning. And I'll talk about primarily the first part will be certain areas of project-based learning, a little bit of online and blended and flipped. Because in education, when I first started, I came from industry. My background is actually in mechanical engineering. I worked at Anderson Consulting, and I worked for a venture fund in San Francisco. And then after the fall of 2001, I wanted to make a shift, and I went back to San Diego where I grew up, and I started teaching 9th grade math and physics there. And I got real lucky. I started at a school, if you ever heard of it before, called High Tech High. And at High Tech High, you know, they really wanted us to do project-based learning. Here was this space that says, hey, do what you want, and you can work with 9th graders, and you could start putting some stuff together. And you know, really, I didn't have that much direction, but I had a lot to kind of pull from. You know, I had the engineering design process that I was trained in. I had from Anderson, it's very similar to IDEO's design thinking. There was mathematical modeling, scientific inquiry. All of that kind of was in my my toolbox to kind of use. I didn't have, because at BIE, when we talk about PBL, we want to try to help the masses try to do it. How do you systemically do PBL in a system, be it a school or a district? So we talk about usually these 8 essential elements. And I don't want to go in depth. You could go on our website, learn more about each one. But I didn't have this to start off with. But at the core of it, still a significant content and these 21st century competencies that a lot of these organizations wanted us to do. For example, critical thinking, creativity, communication, and collaboration. That's at the heart of what we do. And everything else around the edge, you see, is very similar to engineering design process and all those, starting with a question, doing a need to know, having student voice and choice within it. They're iterating, and they're also presenting what they're doing. At the same time, doing very deep inquiry in the subject area. So I kind of wanted to reflect about seeing all this stuff in the very beginning in the morning. There's so much stuff. It's like, I'm super inspired. I want to like tear down a wall and rebuild it with 3D printing and then send it to China so they can make it cheaper. And so I want to do that right now. And I started thinking, how did I start? Because, you know, a lot of times you think about this, you know, it's a lot. It's a lot for a teacher. And a lot of times we're very sympathetic, kind of the empathy for design thinking of, you know, there's a lot of 1%ers out there, and we work with a lot of the 1%ers. Those 15,000, 17,000 teachers, they're the ones that are like, yeah, let's do it. But then we have to also look at the mass middle. The mass middle of all the other teachers saying, hey, you know, how are we all going to do this? And kind of there's that notion of they like to renovate a lot of things, right? It's easy for them to adapt and modify perhaps, and that's what I hoped. So my very first project, I happened to do it at the Port of San Diego. I was like, you know, what am I going to do? And I happened to be going around San Diego, and I saw these urban trees that were along the port. I said, hey, you know what? I could do something like that. Integrate math and physics. They're doing all the wind load calculations and all of that. And I went to the website, and everything was there. This was way back in 2003. So I feel kind of old now with all these 3D printers and all that. So 2003, I found the project. It was there waiting. I just had to modify it and adapt it. And what was really neat was that when I called the port, I said, hey, I'm an educator. I'm trying to do this thing. They were like, wait a minute. Like, you're modifying our thing to education? It was like a total win-win for them. Because they basically were trying to get the arts and that into schools, and I was basically trying to get their program into my classroom. And then they said, hey, why don't you bring all of your students to our office? Because we have 200 maquettes that artists have submitted. And you know, it's kind of like changing the paradigm, flipping it, where we did the field trip first. The kids went out and saw what they were trying to create or produce, and they went back into our classroom and started creating their own. Now, it isn't a fancy, like Derek and all them, your 3D printers and all that. This is the first time, you know, we had barbecue skewers, a couple of glue guns, and we're learning geometry, and I handed out little terracotta pots. It was the first time I said I handed out a pot in the classroom. So they created these things, and it was really neat then. At the end of it all, the port was like, well, what are you doing with them? And they said, we would like to see them. And this is actually, at the time, this was a councilwoman for San Diego, and the ones in the back were the top ones designed by, well, the students designed it, and our staff like these top 6, and they went off, they started judging them and assessing them. We're using the same assessment criteria for them, what they chose for artists who were putting it into the port. So it's really neat kind of how they're looking at the maquettes from another angle, because that's where everybody was looking at it. We never even thought about that. And the kids like, why are they doing that? Because that's where someone's going to be viewing it from. So after that, they chose this one is spindling tops, and these 2 girls designed this one, and they allow them to present at their board meeting. And it was really awesome. I thought it was going to be super simple. No one's going to be who's going to go to the port board meeting? And they had some big issue. There were like 200 people there. And they were like arguing, and at the end, they're like, all right, hey, hold on. We got to hear these young ladies talk about the project. And I was like, oh my gosh. And the girls came up, and they hit it out of the park, talked about what it was all about, what they learned. And after that, at the time, they dedicated 1 tree to a student after that kind of experience. We tried to make ours, but it was actually harder to make it than we thought. We didn't have all the fancy things now of welding and all that in our classroom, but that would have been the next stage if I did it again. So I want to just mention that again, just to kind of think about, this was a shift in learning, not just project-based learning, but also having students be, and they say this now, not just consumers and producers, right, of content. And I'd like to show you, I've been traveling a lot. I went back down to San Diego today with a bunch of other folks, and I happen to see all my friends there. I just want to remind you, besides, like, they're trying to get into laser cutters, 3D printing as well, but also from the humanities perspective, they're also integrating with folks and creating books. And this one is actually a book on a molecular intersection they did in partnership with DermTech. And all the students created this interdisciplinary project, and they created this book, and they printed out on a blurb, and now they're kind of authors and whatnot, and they're distributing this. Other writers, they're created this ampersand, which is out the community to discuss a community issue. For example, the ampersand book this year, my friend was doing, the students were trying to answer the question, what is the cultural DNA of San Diego? And they all had a driving question, they started designing it, and they all put it into this book, and everyone was kind of like super happy because they got published and all that. Sorry if I'm talking too fast, I only got 10 minutes. So at the same time, HSRA, I visited them in Minnesota, my friend Sam Seidel, who was another keynoter with, well, Rosanna might mention him. He went to St. Paul, Minnesota, and he observed this school called the High School of Recording Arts. So I just want to kind of represent that here are these underserved youth who were, not going to school or whatnot too, and this guy, TC, started this school called High School of Recording Arts, and they call it Hip Hop High, and the students are producing their own work. And it was my first time going there, and I've been wanting to go for so long, and TC, they're creating everything from all the cover art and whatnot, and they're playing it on the radio. I mean, they have clients. It's not just sponsored, they have sponsored projects in a way, clients of all state. Everyone's having them kind of produce material for them, but it's actually like sponsored projects still aligned to content, and they put it out there. So it's kind of beyond, I know there's a lot of amazing things happening out there, but also kind of representing the other areas too. And then back to this. So one thing I want to mention is that one element that kind of could really impact teachers is this kind of notion of public audience. Because if you think about subtle shifts for teachers, kind of like a mass thing, that thing kind of changes schools when they start exhibiting their work. That's why makerspaces are doing so well. My friend Larry Bach, he was a successful entrepreneur in San Diego. He did a lot of pharmaceutical companies. He came and said, he asked High Tech High, hey, can we be part of this San Diego festival? And he kind of like, long story short, he's one of those people, and next thing you know, you're helping him do this project and putting on this festival. And he wanted to do one of my old projects where kids kind of made a Operation board game. And he got a little bit of money to do it, and I brought in teachers from 5 different districts. There were like 16 teachers, gave them a half-day of training. They didn't know anything about circuitry at all, taught them really basics on circuitry. They brought in elementary concepts all the way to AP botany. And then we said, here you go. Now take all this box and this Radio Shack material and see you in 3 months. And I was freaking out because I'd never worked with this many people, and we didn't know what was going to happen. So they had this big science festival in San Diego in Balboa Park, and Larry Bach was like, he told me that they permitted the space for about 2,000 people. 50,000 people show up. So 50,000 people show up, not just to see the Operation Board Game. We had 200 of these Operation Board Games throughout. Again, this is very low tech, so sorry, Derek. This is very low tech. But they went about, and everyone was playing with the games, adults, young kids, kind of interacting with the material or whatnot too. But it kind of just this space to present and exhibit what they were doing. So an important thing to take away from organizations like he kind of went on and created the US Science Engineering Festival that happens in the National Mall in DC. 2 years ago, he took the festival there. They had 750,000 people were involved. 500,000 were involved on the mall, and there were 250 in satellite events. So just to kind of take away from what makerspace in these festivals, you got to give them the space. Not just kind of literally space, but also like the academic space to create and make this their own. Dale Doherty, he went to our office, and it was interesting because from the makerspace perspective, he's going right to the student. You know, he's interacting with teachers and whatnot, but he's going right to the student. And beyond the big events that people see when you have this big maker fairs and whatnot, he has this thing where he tells the teachers and the students to try to get space in their schools. And they put in a proposal. They have to create this whole pitch to the district. Why should we have this little room here? And it's kind of interesting. It wasn't just giving it to them, because in earning it or trying to create a proposal, gave them a purpose to the space, what they're going to use with it. Not just, here you go, now do something. They had kind of earned it. They figured out what they're going to use the space when they finally get it, and that's how he's being very successful, of letting them earn the space. So I think if you can have space, give them a purpose. Give them a purpose of some sort. Another piece I want to talk about is just online learning. Online learning is a big buzzword right now, too. We try to dabble in it because people want to learn more about project-based learning. They want to expand that 15 to 17,000 to 150, 170,000 people. So we started, the Hewlett Foundation gave us money to do a pilot. So we started it on PBLU, doing online classes there. We used different platforms. I did it a little differently because I kind of wanted to make a Kickstarter version of it. Since even though the classes were free and they were sponsored, you know, the saddest thing is that you hold the class and no one shows up. And one thing you do at least is kind of create a Kickstarter version of it. So then what I started doing was just trying to say, okay, if we had a maximum of 150 people in it, and we had 22 days to do it, kind of gives them an incentive to kind of socially put it out there for other folks. And then people the classes were selling out like in 2 days because they really want to not miss out and be part of the experience. So something about these kind of sponsored events, because since it was free, you want to give them some kind of like urgency to apply. Now on that online platform, we just give them proof of completion if they finish these little short classes we had in regards to project-based learning. I'm also on the advisory council for Karen Cater's Digital Promise. They're really trying to do micro-credentials for education at this point, beyond just kind of like this whole badges, more rigorous micro-credentials, just giving people recognition as they move within a discipline. So I can tell you more about that later on. Obviously, I humbly throw PBLU logo on the corner because I wanted to put it with Coursera, EDX, and Udacity. But these are the big MOOCs, right? If you haven't heard about a MOOC before, it's a massively open online course. Coursera is the one, Udacity is kind of spun out through Stanford. Coursera is in Stanford, and EDX is in MIT and Harvard in that area. So they're offering these big classes. If you haven't seen them before, has everyone heard of MOOC? I want to make sure. Has anyone heard of MOOC before? Yeah. The latest article, in regards to this whole ecosystem idea, I don't know if you saw this on EdSurge. If you're not subscribed to EdSurge, I advise you to do it. It was interesting where they were learning from their mistakes. So a lot of times when they put it out there, like, hey, let's do these MOOCs, everyone's like, yeah, this is great, but the ecosystem wasn't there yet for them. And they're making most of their revenue just on making sure that the person at the computer is that person. So they're making $4 million a month just on verifying that person is them. So if you think about an ecosystem, you know, everyone wants to do this big, massively open course, but it's little things that people are starting to design. So kind of something to think about. One thing they've also noticed that these have corporate partnerships. They're going with the top universities, and corporations are using the classes as personal development for their employees. That's what they're also finding as well. If you haven't heard of General Assembly, my wife, she took these courses, and that's something that's interesting. It's an alternative to going back to grad school or whatnot, is you could take these kind of shorter classes on a very discrete subject area like UX design or social media, and also just kind of in the private sector. What's interesting about General Assembly and also now with Coursera is the fact that it's also in the context of project-based learning. It's great because Udacity and General Assembly, they're designing a product within the class. And in General Assembly, the instructors are from the industry. And then when they present the product at the end, the panelists are all from the industry as well. So think about like an 8-week kind of like Project Runway kind of ongoing interview. So it's kind of a different kind of paradigm. So quickly then, our face-to-face, which we always wanted to be project-based learning, is kind of this notion of the online piece is how do you do blended? When we talk about that, a lot of times we're trying to figure out how do we do both, and that's kind of hybrid. How do you bring in mobile? How do you bring one-to-one? Essentially for blended, what we thought about is maybe we could meet physically face-to-face first. What they found is if you meet in a physical space like this, and then we all go off online, and we actually would complete the courses a lot we'd have better completion rates because we come together, we could interact more, we could collaborate because we actually physically met together, and people could then start collaborating online. So that's one hybrid piece. I watch my time at 11. So another thing people want to talk about, this whole notion of flipped classroom. I just want to give you a book here to learn a little bit more about it. Jonathan Bergman, my friend, he wrote a book called Flipped Classroom. You can get it on Amazon, but essentially talks about the multiple ways you could flip a classroom. The original notion of flipping was you could watch videos at home, you have more time in the classroom because you get all the lectures that are online. People think about Khan, but MIT was the one that really kind of put a lot of backing behind it. MIT's open courseware on their platform. Basically, all the lectures are online. You have the infrastructure for it. You can play the videos, hopefully through your broadband or whatnot, and then you could have more time in the classroom to do deep dives into things, and we hope that is project-based learning. But if you want to learn more about flip thinking, you have this. What's also changing in the realm of education is fundraising. It's not just kind of there's a lot of money going into ed tech, but a lot of entrepreneurs are going through Kickstarter. This one group here, these two fellows that I met, they were Tool fellows. They were creating this app where you could have these electronic components and they put it together little circuits, and their app could actually play where the current was flowing through the circuit. So they're able to make the invisible visible on their app, but they raised $120,000 on Kickstarter, and they went off to go to a manufacturing accelerator in China. So I thought it was kind of interesting if the manufacturing plant, that they learned all the plants were here in a kind of ecosystem space like you're trying to create here in San Leandro. What if they just did it here? So people are doing that. Students are also, my former student just raised $8,000 for his thesis, for his project he's doing while he's in New York School of Tisch. I was back in San Diego again. My friends are doing a college tour. All the students went online and they raised $20,000. They had corporate sponsoring. They matched 10,000 more of that, so that all their students were going on college tours. My friend Ashanti, he's the vice principal in the East Bay. He's creating this Ever Forward campaign for young gentlemen to have mentorship. He just raised $30,000 last week. So the kind of people are trying to, it's not just kind of cookie sales and whatnot. Two people are going and doing crowdfunding for a lot of these things. A couple more. Sorry, Rosanna. So we have the sharing aspect. Sharing's changing also. It's not just kind of like, here, share your folder, share your materials from teacher to teacher. Two movements are OER Commons and Creative Commons, just open source stuff. If you haven't seen this already, the Euler Foundation and MacArthur Foundation are really pushing OER Commons internationally and whatnot. Teachers putting stuff where everyone could use it free and clear. It's not copyrighted material. The bottom two I want to show that juxtaposed with that are platforms like Next Lesson or Teachers Pay Teachers, where they're giving opportunities for teachers who are designing little lessons and whatnot to share that, but perhaps kind of share this revenue model of like they get $1, they get 50 cents for sharing this lesson. So it's kind of like these, I just want to show you two polar opposites. Sharing is happening, there's this whole kind of free market, and also trying to find ways where teachers or people who are developing stuff have a platform, right? Like my friend Dion, who has his company Next Lesson, which is here in the Bay Area, he's in Piedmont. One of the things they had is performance task, and someone mentioned in the first group in the morning, what could you do to kind of impact some of these companies? The data. One thing that corporations could do, these performance tasks, these worksheets or whatnot he's creating, but he wants to get worksheets from data that's coming from actual companies. So like kind of like citizen science or whatnot too, like all the data that's happening, why can't the worksheets, the homework assignments students are doing actually using real corporate data and kind of crunching the numbers for something that you're looking for. So that's what he's trying to do within his Next Lesson. The last thing I'll say is that I said a lot, there's even so much more, but you could understand like how fast I'm speaking. Imagine the teachers in this thing too, how are they gonna react to like all these things we're talking about, from project-based learning, looking at these other online platforms and whatnot too. The next piece then, how do we coach them? Coaching is starting to evolve now too, because coaching can't scale. A lot of companies are coming to us because our folks are a lot of early adopters. The three companies that we're looking at, what they're trying to do is have video, because people are using video now, but it's not just making it more interactive. As you're either watching user-generated videos, like a teacher's recording themselves in the classroom doing something, and a coach online could give them suggestions or questions and strengths or notes online through a time-coded, indexed video. So this is kind of the trend that's happening now, because after they get kind of one-on-one PBL coaching that we give them, it's all about coaching. How do you do sustained visits for all these teachers or whatnot? So there's a lot more. I'm sorry it took too long. You can go to our website, and you can email me as well, but without further ado, Rosani Musetti.